Okay, Harry, I think you're good to go.
Right, thank you. Welcome everybody, and everybody who isn't a member of this committee who may be watching. I'll ask everybody to mute or take action so we aren't disturbed by extraneous noise. Matt, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
I've not received any formal apologies. I think PM might not be available, but I've not received anything to say that.
Yeah, I fully understand that. I'm sure we all do. Any public questions?
I haven't received any.
Right, let's go through the minutes. Page 1. Page 2. Andrew Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple of, I think, typographical errors in paragraph 22 on page 2. Line 8, I think last year, as is customary, there were only 30 days in April, not 31. And then in the very last line, the word then appears twice at the beginning of that line, which I think it only needs one. That's all, Mr. Chairman, on that page.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Councillor Brown. I'm sure, Matt, we can make adjustments to meet Mr. Brown's high standards.
Yep, no problem.
Page 3. Page 4. Okay, so I take that as passed. We should take a vote on that.
Yep, just a show of hands to show you accept those.
Minutes accepted?
Yep, that looks unanimous. Yep.
Thank you very much indeed. Agenda number, item number 8. The update and report of the model code of conduct.
Sorry, Harry, I
Cara,
think
oh, sorry, have I missed?
Item number 4 now.
Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry, I apologize.
You've made a big jump there, Harry.
Yeah, I did. I was really interested in that. Okay, actions arising from the minutes. Is there any action? Councillor Dixon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can I just draw your attention, please, to page 4, and in particular at the bottom of page 4, the matter which was agreed that in the absence of the monitoring officer, a written answer would be appropriate. Mr. Chairman, I regret to advise that I have yet to receive an answer of any kind, and I'm mindful that it is nearly 4 months on. So I wonder if we might just answer that question, and subsequent to that, whether we have an answer to the question.
Yes, certainly. Can I ask Emma to come in here and perhaps comment on that question?
If I respond initially around the unfortunate lack of response, and then perhaps the monitoring officer can give a view as to how the actual matter may be addressed. So as I'm sure members are aware, the previous monitoring officer has now left the authority, and that matter arose during a period of time when she was going through the restructure process, and there were various other issues around her departure from the authority. So I think, you know, to some extent, I didn't forward that to her because I wasn't fully aware of her situation at the time and it didn't seem appropriate, so I accept responsibility for that. That said, I do appreciate that there is a response required, so I don't know if the current interim monitoring officer wants to speak as to how we can provide a response to that item now.
Thank you, Emma. Can I now call on Cara, please, as interim monitoring officer? Welcome, Cara, for the first time to this meeting. It's only my second time, so we're not exactly experienced. So I'll ask you to respond to Councillor Dixon, please.
Thank you. Well, I think there is some difficulties, as it had been said that there would be a written response, but that hasn't been forwarded to the former monitoring officer. I think it's very difficult for me to now respond, as I don't know the answer to your question. I think that's the difficulty there.
Okay. I mean, it was, in a way, an outcome of the way the meeting was, of how the meeting evolved last time, that the monitoring officer was probably unable or not in position to respond in writing. Councillor Dixon, how do you suggest a way forward?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think to some extent you are quite correct that during the meeting, the events that unfolded were such that we were not going to get an answer on that day, and therefore the request for a written answer was the right one. I'm grateful to hear the explanation from Officer Denny, and we are where we are, so to speak, but we do need, I think, to understand a little more about what the answer really is. And so therefore, I would ask that the matter be progressed even at this late stage, but the committee might have a view on whether it was appropriate to leave it so long before we have picked up the fact that there is no answer for this meeting. So we can't go back and redo any of the past, so to speak, but we have to move forward, and an answer clearly can be provided, and I think needs to be provided in a timely fashion from today.
All right. I think we can explore how that can be done, and we'll do that with the officers. I mean, there is some question, to be honest, is if that written question actually falls within the bailiwick of this committee.
Harry, I just note we've got a number of members waiting to ask questions. I think
Okay, so
Councillor Shires and Councillor Perry-Warnes.
Can actually also Andrew Brown has his hand raised, so I'm not sure who is first. Can I go to Councillor Brown first, as I did spot him first?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just wondering whether a practical way forward for this is to for a proposal to come, say, from one of us in this meeting, that the Chief Executive gives a response to this question. I haven't discussed this with anyone in Democratic Services, so it may be that I'm not in order suggesting it, but I'm just looking around for a solution to this impasse, and wonder whether that's a possible way forward, Mr. Chairman.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Brown. I appreciate that. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On the similar vein as Councillor Brown, I don't believe that this does fall under the remit of Standards Committee. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to be told that I'm wrong on that matter. But this particular question, I don't believe falls under us. And I would suggest that we do go to the Chief Exec, or it is suggested that perhaps Councillor Dixon ask the Chief Executive for a response on this, rather than it being circular in this committee again.
Thank you, Councillor Shires. And was there somebody else? Oh, and Councillor Perry-Warnes.
Thank you. I actually said in the last meeting that it was outside our remit, I felt, and that maybe in the future it could come back to us if it then related to member conduct. But I don't think it's really this committee's business. But on top of that, the monitoring officer has left, and she was the one that wrote that report. So I don't really understand how the new monitoring officer could explain her reasoning for what she put.
I agree with you. I think that would be unreasonable. I mean, the report in question had been passed already by GRAC, who deal with governance and who have a stronger hold on this subject than we do. So I'm quite happy that this be put forward to the Chief Executive to answer Nigel Dixon. Councillor Dixon, would that be satisfactory?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't mind how the question is answered in that sense. So I will, I guess I am content for that, but I do believe that the question having been raised by this Standards Committee, I emphasize the word standards here because we are all about conduct and setting the best examples, and we should have at the forefront of our mind, and we will consider very shortly, I'm sure, the application of the Nolan Principles. And one can look in the Nolan Principles and identify a number of aspects that might relate to the transparency in particular of this matter. So whether it actually strictly falls within the remit of the committee is another argument maybe to be had. But the fact of the matter is, this committee did actually consider that report in its fullness, and there was no advice given during the course of that meeting that the matter wasn't within the remit of this committee. So I think that probably is a point that may be argued another day, and I'm not sure that it's entirely germane to the one that we have before us now. So to that extent, providing an answer comes, and I do believe this committee has the right to hear that answer. It's heard the question. And so at some point, hopefully not too far in the future, we will have an answer to the question. So that's my view. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Perry-Warnes.
Thank you. I did actually say in the last meeting that it was not, it was not our business. But the other thing, no, it's okay. I'll just leave it at that. I did say it.
Okay. Councillor Lucy Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, I can't see how contract procurement exemptions falls under standards unless there's a standards complaint in. Could either Matt or Emma just guide us on what the remit of the committee is? Because I'm concerned that, again, we spent an entire meeting 4 months ago discussing this, and it's the first thing we're talking about again. So can we have a final say on the matter so we can move on, please?
Thank you, Councillor Shires.
I'm happy
yes,
to do that. It's very much focused on member conduct issues. I did have a look at the terms of reference before we started the committee, and actually, I'll see if I can just
page 97, chapter 7 of the Constitution.
So it's very much promoting and maintaining high standards of conduct by district councillors, refers to members of Code of Conduct, training for councillors, granting dispensations, assessing allegations of misconduct, overseeing whistleblowing and oversight of the Constitution. So it is very limited to member conduct, and in fact officer conduct and standards don't fall within the Standards Committee either. So this matter does fall within GRAC. I think it's worth saying, to reassure Councillor Dixon to some extent, probably won't satisfy the answer to the question, but there is an audit that is just being started to look specifically at the contract procurement exemptions. I requested that, and following on from various comments and issues that have arisen over previous months and at the request of the leader at full council in December 2019. So Constitution Working Party have had an initial look, and then it will be going through to GRAC probably June, September time, and that will be specifically looking at that process. So that will hopefully provide, and I have, as part of the review, they will be looking over the 2019-20 procurement exemption forms. So that covers this period as well that was in the monitoring officer's report. So there will be further discussion on this matter that will be coming up in the coming months. But I will action the request and forward this to the Chief Executive so we can get a written answer to the question that is specifically raised by Councillor Dixon at the last meeting.
Thank you very much, Emma. Councillor Dixon, are you content? And can we now move on with your blessing?
Mr. Chairman, I have no wish to linger any longer. I don't see any of the discussion so far being very fruitful in moving us very far forward to the actual question. I think that we've said enough, and I think this committee has probably expressed its position in more than one way, and that's probably enough. We will leave it to the Chief Executive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dixon. There is something I wish to raise. There's been some criticism regarding us moving into private business at the last meeting, and if I was at fault, I apologise. Perhaps we should have raised the question of the private business as we continued through our discussions last time. But I would point out that we actually did discuss private business right through that meeting. So I apologise to anybody who was excluded and was left hanging around fruitlessly. I do apologise for that. But I will not apologise for the fact we were in private session, because I think we met the reasons we were in private session, absolutely. And on that subject, when we are in private session, and when we are looking at governance, and sorry, when we are looking at ethical governance, to read verbatim sentences from that private session in private eye would suggest that somebody in the room of this private session leaked that private information to a national publication. And my feeling is that is not setting a very high standard. In fact, my feeling is it could easily be illegal. And I think, should it happen again, we might consider taking this further. Emma, do you have anything you wish to say on this?
No, I don't think so, Chair. You've covered that fully, I think. It is a breach of the code to leak confidential information, whether that's confidential papers from an agenda or anything that's discussed during private business. So I did raise my concerns with the Chief Executive at the time. So I think it's just a question of, you know, as you've done, reminding members. And I think perhaps, you know, when we do cover the training for members on the Code of Conduct, which we'll touch on in the next agenda item, I think that's something that we need to reinforce quite strongly, that members do need to abide by the rules of confidentiality. But otherwise, you've covered it very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else? Any comment on that? Councillor Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think your explanation of the matter of going into private business is very appropriate. I also think that your warning, if that's the right word, if you like, or censure or caution with regard to matters that might get from this or any meeting that's held in private within the district council is a matter of some concern. And I think we as a standards committee ought to be setting the standard in terms of expectations that should be replicated across the whole gamut of meetings that are held in private sessions. So I would just add my weight to your emphasize that it is indeed lamentable that anything, and I wasn't aware myself that anything had got to, if it was verbatim to a private eye or any other periodical. That is very, very regrettable and is a matter of some considerable concern.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Rest.
Thank you, Chairman. Would I be then correct in saying that the minutes that we have published here from the last minute were in fact items that we had discussed privately, but we are now prepared to publish them on our website?
Just a comment there, John, they're sanitised to the point that they're safe for kind of public release.
Thank you.
The usual way, rather than having kind of exempt minutes.
That's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, I don't want to prolong this particular item on the agenda, but I just wanted to raise the issue of the member officer protocol review, which I think is mentioned in paragraph 22 on page 2. And as this item is for actions arising from the previous minutes as opposed to matters arising as well as actions from the previous minutes, which is a slightly curious omission from our standard agenda. I just wanted to ask the officers present whether this review has commenced, and if it has, is it in any way related to other items later in the agenda relating to codes of conduct?
This is an item that's on the work programme for the Constitution Working Party. So I think that will probably go through to their next meeting, which is in April. It was actually a piece of work that the previous monitoring officer sort of set in motion. She felt it was due for a review. So that will, it's a sort of standard time period. It's been about 3 or 4 years since it was last reviewed. So that will go to Constitution Working Party, but myself or the monitoring officer will report back to this committee because it sits across both as it includes member conduct as well. And I'm happy to obviously keep any members informed regarding the agenda for Constitution Working Party if you want to see how that progresses.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you. Let us move on. Items of urgent business.
None received.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. I guess we're all councillors.
I don't see any hands raised there. I don't think there's anything relating to anything.
Right. Item 7. Parish and district members register of interests and officer register of gifts and hospitality.
This is just a reminder that it's available, really, Chairman. However, I think in one of the items coming forward, I think there is it's in the response to the review of the corporate governance arrangements. There's a proposal coming forward as part of that audit to include a flow chart in committee agendas to help members declare interests if needed. So just for information, really.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to say one thing. I just note that we were all invited to the pier show opening when I first became a councillor, and I noticed that some people declared it and some people didn't. As I was unable to ascertain if the ticket was worth £25 or not, I didn't. Matt, any guidance on that?
I think I would probably refer to Cara there, or Emma. Don't know if you can clarify that. I think tickets should be, but I could be wrong. I will, refer to Cara. Sorry, Cara,
you're on mute, Cara.
If you don't know the value and it was possible that it may exceed that amount, it would be in your best interest to send an email and declare it to be safe.
Okay, thank you very much. It was just that I noticed in the EDP that they mentioned the people who mentioned it, so it sounded like a few brave good councillors who actually declared it were picked out in EDP of receiving gifts. So I felt a bit sorry for them, but thank you very much indeed. Okay, moving on, unless anybody's got anything on that. No. Item 8, update on changes to the Model Member Code of Conduct. And who is going to talk on this?
Cara, I believe.
Yes, that's me.
Okay, Cara.
Thank you. I've provided a brief report, which is on page 7, just to give you some information on the new Model Code of Conduct and the possibility of adoption of it by North Norfolk District Council, either completely or with some amendments. And I've just set out the basic background. Under the Localism Act 2011. Local authorities are required to have a code of conduct based on the Nolan principles, and there are obligations there which may be acted upon, and it's designed to encourage democracy. And the present position is that there are all different codes of conducts which have been adopted by various county, district, borough, parish and town councils, and they vary quite widely. And so it's quite possible for confusion where members at a county council are covered in regard to their conduct by one code, but wouldn't be in regard to their capacity as a parish council at the same time. So in that respect, what's being looked at the moment and was considered at the Constitution Working Party was whether there could be a consensus so that there is one code of conduct Norfolk-wide. And that was generally received as a good idea. But the present position, our code of conduct is quite workable at the moment. There's no actual requirement that we have to change it or change it quickly. But in consultation with the other Norfolk authorities, I think it's been considered that it might be a good idea for us all to adopt a like code of conduct. And the reason why this model code of conduct has come out is that there has recently, well, back in January 2019, but subject to some delays, there was a review of the Committee on Standards in Public Life, and that review made a number of recommendations, and one of which was the update of a model code of conduct. And you'll see attached to the agenda is the new model code of conduct. The LGA published this in December just gone, and it's for members to think about whether they would be happy to adopt this new model code of conduct with amendments. I think one of the things to point out is that at present it is a template, so it can be, the idea is that it can be amended to suit authorities, but as mentioned early on, there is this perhaps hope that Norfolk authorities could all agree to one sole code of conduct that could be shared to avoid confusion. I think that's my, without kind of repeating what I've put in my update, I think that's the general information that I wish to share, and for members to consider the views of the Constitution Working Party, and to see whether they would consider a Norfolk-wide code of conduct if that becomes possible.
Thank you very much. Who would like to? I see Councillor Rest hand up.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Yes, it's an interesting report, and the LGA have obviously gone to a lot of trouble. And I remember when it came out. Just to raise one point, I have a disappointment. Is on page 11. The table 2 says the number of responses by respondent type. And it's very disappointing to see that the very, very lowest is actually county councillors, were the lowest people that replied to this survey, which is rather disappointing that 172 from the districts and boroughs and various others, but 17 from counties, I felt was a bit weak. But I mean, that's obviously people have their own opinion on how they fill them in, but it's just something that I happened to notice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rest. Councillor Dixon.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say 2 points, but I'll make 3 points, because I'll just respond, if I might, to Councillor Rest's point. Being a county councillor, all I can say on my own behalf, Mr. Chairman, is that I fill in so many surveys during the course of a year that I really couldn't, with my hand on my heart, say that I did or didn't. So I'd have to pass on that one. But turning to perhaps more serious points that I was going to make, could I say that, firstly, in principle, I have to say that for me, it's a no-brainer. We ought to be adopting a common standard across, whether it be Norfolk councils or whether it be a wider group of councils. I really don't mind too much about it. But so I warm very much to the opportunity for us to adopt a common standard, because I'm very mindful, just making a third point, I'm very mindful how much time and resource individual councils spend on developing individual policies, when, quite honestly, when you boil it down to the basics, policies should be a statement of many of the principles and basics that we should be working to, and the differences that should exist between us are relatively few. I could argue perhaps some differences between metropolitan councils and the most rural councils in terms of some greater emphasis here or emphasis there, but I have to say that there must be much to be gained by working across a number of councils. And so I can't comment in detail, and I suspect if we were each to comment in detail on the content of the model that's proposed, we would probably all come out with different observations. And quite how we would rationalise that, I don't know. We would take some time in doing that. That would be replicated 8 times over in the council, in the the case of this county. And I have to say that it's a bit balmy and it's a bit of a no-brainer to me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Dixon. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I to some extent agree with Councillor Dixon that there are 314 local authorities or thereabouts in England and Wales, and they have a common highway code, for example, that they all abide by. So it should be possible to have a common code of conduct with national enforcement, as it were. Given that we don't have the best of track records in duty to cooperate meetings with our colleagues at County Hall in certain spheres of our operations, I listen with interest that there is an attempt to have this agreed across eight district councils, but what is the mechanism for consultation? We've been told this is a template. No doubt each district council will have their thoughts as to how this should be amended. What is the mechanism for the ultimate arbiter to decide on the final wording which will be acceptable? And I say this with my fingers crossed when I say it to all 8 district councils and beyond. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor, sorry, Cara, would you like to give a reply to that one?
I think at this stage, it has been the monitoring officers from the various local authorities. We're speaking together, and I'm planning to get some updates. The various monitoring officers are speaking to their standards committee. Then we're all planning to come together, discuss, and then bring it back to yourselves. So ultimately, you will have the say on it.
Thank you. I mean, my feeling is this is a product of a working party, and if you have a working party and you've got to trust what they come up with. So they will have gone into it in much finer detail than we could possibly do. So I think just reading through it, I found nothing that was contentious immediately to me. So if anybody else has got any comments on this.
I was just going to...
I believe we're...
Sorry, Harry,
yes.
I was just going to add for clarification. I think we do have a meeting scheduled for April, so there can be kind of one more return if there are any kind of late amendments to that document before it goes for final kind of approval as such.
Okay,
so you don't have to give the
so
kind of final word on it now.
Are we voting? Yeah, are we noting
No, you're
this?
not. It's just a note. Yeah, it's still in a developmental stage, so you don't need to vote to approve it or anything now.
Okay, is everybody content that we move on? All right. Next item.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I wonder if it's just worth recording the fact that we are in agreement as a committee to follow the principles articulated so far. That doesn't commit us to what we had before us, but I think it would be good to capture the agreement that this committee is content to move forward in that direction.
Do we need a vote on that, in your opinion, Councillor Dixon?
Well, I don't really mind, providing the record shows that we are in agreement, and I think that then gives the monitoring officer the necessary empowerment, if you like, to continue in that direction. So I think it would be remiss of this.
A show of hands
if we didn't.
Yeah.
A show of hands then. So all in favour?
All in favour of what? Sorry, could you clarify?
Of noting that we are approving generally this this document.
I think it would be helpful for Cara as well if you could indicate your support for a one county approach, because that's, you know, where the monitoring officers would like to see the support, whether you'd like to see that standard document.
I think we're all, can we have a show of hands on that, please? A one county approach?
Yeah,
I think that's unanimous.
I can record consensus of support there in the minutes.
That was the key point I really wanted to capture, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
And I thank you very much, Councillor Dixon, for that. That's very good. So now we have item 8, update on changes to the model member. Oh no, sorry, item 9, response to review to corporate governance.
Yes, that's me. Thank you. So this is sort of follows on quite well from our last meeting, actually, where you had quite a lengthy discussion about registers of interest and some of the issues that we've had. This corporate governance review has been running on for several months, and it's now been finalised, but it's not gone to GRAC yet. So I think it's going in March, but I do have some time sort of deadlines to get some of these things in place that fall before then, and with the timing of this meeting and your particular oversight for the registers of interest and declarations of interest, I thought it would be good to bring it to you now so you could see what the review had found and the response that I had provided and the monitoring officer as well. So I've set it out in the report. It's relatively straightforward, and a lot of these issues were discussed at the last meeting, but certainly as far as the registers of interest, there is an intention to remind you in April ahead of the May annual council meeting to check your register. Obviously that won't pick up anything that changes between then, so my team will try and remind you regularly, ideally on a monthly basis, just to prompt you and make you think, is there anything that you need to check on your register at all? We are looking at developing the register as a web form. That is obviously useful for district councillors, but it's hugely useful for our parish councillors. We've got nearly 1,000 registers of interest that we hold for parish councillors, and that is where the bulk of our processing and managing and redacting and so on sits. So that's something that we're looking to get in to place. Probably wait now to see if the new code comes in, because there are some changes that will need to be reflected in the form, but that's will make a big difference, certainly from our end, and hopefully for councillors too, because you can just go on and update it as and when you need to without having to sort of email or physically amend. The next issue that the review focused on was actually declarations of interest in meetings. We don't have a huge number of these really, and I don't know whether that means that people don't know how to do it or whether people just don't have interest, but it was felt that perhaps we should be more robust around that, and I'm happy to pick that up. If there are declarations that are slipping through, then absolutely we can address those. I see Councillor Ress has got his hand raised. I don't know if he wants to ask a question. Do you want to ask now, John, or wait till the end?
Sorry, no, at the end, Emma, sorry.
Thank you. This is around just making that section, I think it's usually agenda item 3 or 4, a bit strengthening it on agendas. And also there is a proposal which is a bit further on in the agenda to include a flow chart, and quite a few councils do this. I've put in a couple of examples. They're ones that I've pulled off that are pretty standard, but I'm happy to take your views on which one or neither of them, and it would go on each agenda with a guidance note, and it's just really to give you the reassurance and just to check at the start of the meeting that you haven't got anything, and so I would appreciate your views on that, and I think there is bit of we'll probably strengthen the fact that you can get or you should get advice from the monitoring officer before the meeting if you have a pecuniary interest and you're not sure how that will affect you. It's probably particularly important for development committee, but again, if you suddenly realize halfway through a meeting, actually I think I've got an interest here, absolutely you can still declare that, and myself or the Democratic Services officer in attendance will provide any advice there. So I think the report is relatively straightforward. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'd obviously be very interested in your views on the flow charts. If you have a preference, if you want to add anything, remove them, or not use either of them, then yes, I'd be pleased to hear your feedback. But I'll see what Councillor Rest has to say.
Councillor Rest.
Cool, thank you very much. Emma, I just want some clarification. On page 59, at the very bottom says, if a councillor appears to be biased or have any predetermined their decisions, they must not participate in this meeting. Okay, first of all, do I have to give a reason why I don't want to participate? Or do I have to say what I am biased against? My problem would be that we record these and they go live. And because they're live, people can start trolling, I believe that's the word, to certain members who may have made something and said, well, why didn't you participate in that? I think it's a problem. I understand it. And there's a lot going on at the moment about this bias being done. It was a big thing in universities recently. And I'm just curious to know whether, happy to sort of think if it's something that I feel I might be a little bit biased on, to not take part in that debate. But am I going to be challenged as to why I'm not going to take part in that debate?
I think that particular line, that isn't necessarily standard. This is pulled from another council's form. They've put that in there. We don't necessarily require, I mean, obviously, if you were you've said at the start of a meeting, you know, I'm going to vote this way. I've already made my mind up, but, you know, before you've listened to the debate, I think you would be advised not to take part. I'm not sure we'd require you to leave the meeting at that point. So I'm happy if, you know, if that's the form that you want to go with, I wouldn't necessarily suggest including that line, because I think there is a judgment there. The focus is more on a pecuniary interest, where you have a financial interest, that you do have to leave the room at that point and you cannot participate. So I think they've obviously strengthened that line in this particular form. Again, I'm happy, you know, if other councillors have a view on that. I think it's difficult. You're right. Bias and predetermination is something that it's hard for someone else to judge whether you are biased or predetermined. And sometimes it's hard for yourself to judge that because you may not feel that you are. So I think it's a grey area, and I would agree. I'm not sure that that's necessarily something that we can enforce or insist on. And sometimes, you know, these things will only become apparent after the meeting, possibly, as you say, if someone's watched the live feed. So I'll flag that up as something I wouldn't necessarily suggest is included in the form, or we could review the wording of that particular line.
Are you content with that, Councillor Rest? Councillor Lizzie Shires, and then I'll call Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to highlight that we're going to be getting an electronic web form. Yay. That must take a bit of a load off our team managing all that paperwork. And I just want to know that when there's consistent questioning of savings that we're making, whilst this isn't a cut or a saving, it will save time, which then means time can be spent elsewhere, and time is as valuable to officers as perhaps budget restraints are in general. So I just want to note that I'm very happy that we will be saving officers time that we can use elsewhere. And going back to the previous discussion about predetermination, I think that really applies to planning mostly, because unfortunately those who are sitting within the development committee have got to be extremely careful. It would be interesting to know where predetermination sits within full council debate, because there are quite often times where before the debate has even started, that opposition groups have said, you know, this is how we're going to stand, or this is what we're going to do. So it would remove the ability for that, because that's predetermined, because it comes in before the debate has happened. I do support the predetermination side of it because it means that we have to listen and learn from each other, and I think that's really important. But obviously the bias test would be slightly more difficult because that would be more speculative. But I do feel that predetermination would be something interesting to look to, because it would prevent poor debating, I think, and open up the floor a little bit more.
I can just respond to that briefly, because I think that they're both really useful points. And certainly you're right, predetermination and bias is covered much more thoroughly within the planning code, which is in the Constitution, and it may be worth referencing that within this flowchart just to remind members to read that, because it's much clearer guidance in there. Regarding full council, I think full council is the political arena, essentially. That is the opportunity where members can have that political debate and essentially be quite open about your political views. It's the only meeting where you really can do that, and you can push your political agendas and have those debates. So I think to some extent, yeah, that doesn't apply so much. You know, I think the groups can be quite open there, and that's where the motions and so on come forward. So it is very much more around development committee, that particular line. So I think I will look at that and perhaps cross-reference to the planning protocol as well.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, following on from what Emma has just said, I was just wondering if this footnote about the predetermination test has perhaps been taken slightly out of context. I can see it being wholly applicable to the Development Committee, where we're continually reminded that we can have a predisposition, but not a predetermined view of an outcome. So I'm just wondering whether this is the correct context for that footnote, but assuming it is, moving on. One thing I would like to highlight from following on from the debate at the last meeting is that there are some inconsistencies on the website when you read profiles for members. So I'm just wondering what happens when an amendment comes in from a member, which means that the profile needs to be updated, but the submission from the member doesn't address that. What happens within the council to correct the inaccuracy in the profile if it's not amended following information received on an interim declaration of interest? And also, I assume that we'll be having electronic signatures to emails so that we are able to confirm that the information in the email that you receive is actually provided by the relevant person, and presumably that would remove the need for redaction of signatures that we have currently on the paper format. Sorry, just one or two housekeeping points more than anything there, Emma.
Yes, if I take the last point first.
Sorry, Emma, you're
just muted myself. But take the last point first. Yes, hopefully. I mean, we need to check that. Other councils do them electronically, so I think, you know, we should be able to use an electronic signature for that. It takes a huge amount of time redacting all of those signatures, and although essentially we hold the hard copy with the signature in our section, in reality, I think I've been here 11 years. I've only been looked at once, you know, with someone coming in to view them, and even so, I'm not sure that seeing the signature is particularly beneficial. So if we can be absolutely certain that it's come from that councillor and you know, we're legally compliant, then that's absolutely where we'd like to go. Regarding the first point, do you mean when someone has sent through an amendment to their register of interest, and how we reflect that, or if it's
I've noticed some discrepancies in the profile. It might be, for example, someone's address or area in which they live which doesn't match their disclosed interests in property, or something similar to that, or they may have resigned from the membership of an organisation, but the profile wording presentation on the website below still shows the member as being a member of the same organisation that they've resigned from. It's an issue of consistency. It's a minor point, but I have noticed it happening.
No, that's useful to know. We do try and match that when we can. I mean, if it's something that's purely, where we've not picked it up because, we're saying they're a member of an outside body and they've resigned, then that purely does sit with my team, and that's a process thing which I will absolutely try and ensure we address. I think on a sort of wider note around changes to members' forms, obviously, as we've said before, it does sit with the member to update us. If I'm aware that a member has moved house, I will prompt them to change their form as well, because it's not always the first thing you think of. Oh, I must change my address on my form. It does sit with the member, but we do try and say, oh, you need to update your register as well. So I'm hoping that when we move to an electronic form, that will be easier for us to pick up on those things, and it will prompt us to issue the form each time there's a change of address and so on. And again, if there's a change, if someone comes off an outside body or a committee, not so much a committee, it would be probably a parish or town council or something like that, that it's reflected as quickly as possible. But it is around just the sheer amount of processing. I did ask my colleague Alison, who does that, to prepare me a process note for what she currently does to do those forms, and it goes through 4 separate departments at the moment to get those signed off. So it's just there's so much room for error. I'm amazed that we don't have more errors, to be honest. And with the parish and town council forms, we will be doing a big drive to get to the clerks. I'm actually attending a session with the clerks at NAUC to talk about the forms and making sure that, again, people don't put their address under land and property because they don't necessarily see that that's necessary. So we will be pushing that as well ahead of going to electronic forms to make sure that they're covered as well. But yes, it's not ideal at the moment, and we've still got a lot of work to do, but hopefully we will pick up on all of those issues as we move forward.
Thank you very much.
I have 7 parish councils, Emma, and I can't remember when there was an item on an agenda reminding parish councillors to review and update. So that is something that you might take forward. I'm sure you will do.
That's really useful, actually. Thank you, because I will highlight that when I speak to them. Thank you.
It's Councillor Dixon first, and then Councillor Perry-Warnes.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've heard a lot about bias and predetermination tests, and the discussion so far has gone around the Development Committee. Could I say that this committee is equally reliant on predetermination and bias, because it's only a year ago since this committee spent quite a long meeting considering matters which were pretty close to the judicial system as you are likely to get. And predetermination and bias has to be very adequately covered, has to be fully covered in the considerations of this committee. So let's not overlook where we are ourselves. We are at the very centre of that, and we ought to be leading on that. So these things can catch us by surprise, but that's just one thing that we probably have overlooked ourselves here, and we must not overlook it. We should be setting the standard here. Just picking up on the point that Councillor Rest raised, which I think is part of a wider issue around our exposure to trolling and so forth, and those sort of things that are probably more associated with the social media. I think that is a very real issue, and I think that comes back to having sufficient protective measures in place to ensure that councillors are not prevented or inhibited from expressing their views, because that's the bottom line here. And if ever we reach the stage where councillors are not safe or do not feel safe to speak honestly, then we are in a very sad place. But I hope we don't kind of get to that point. But I know that in some instances there are examples of where that has been in reality a key factor, and that is very sad. But that is a reflection, unfortunately, of the kind of society that we are in, and that we have to do our best to ensure that democracy includes feeling free to express your view without the fear of retribution from whatever form. And my final point, I think, on this is that I think we have to be realistic. I think that this system will never be perfect. The processes that Emma has described, for example, and what we as individuals have to exercise and follow, we will never be perfect. So there will always be things that will slip through the net. The thing, though, that we must make sure is that none of those technical errors ever get to the point where decision-making in this council accommodates people who deliberately do not declare their interests in order to influence outcomes. That's what this is all about. And if ever we reach the day when that is happening, then we can say that our declaration of interest processes have completely failed. I don't think we are at that point. I think that we are at the point of quite reasonably looking, as we did in our last meeting, at the situations that lead to that. And we have to be realistic, and we have to be prepared to put in place proportionate arrangements that will prompt people to do the right thing at the right time. But let's not kid ourselves that we will ever remove all the errors, because I don't believe that's going to be the case. Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any comments on that, Emma, or you're quite content? Councillor Perry-Warnes.
Thank you. I'm very much in favour of concentrating on the predetermination, but I'm incredibly wary about including biases, because they are really fundamental to cognitive processing. And the real question is whether they're conscious or unconscious. And I think that should be a matter of member training, not standards. I
think we can all agree on that, actually. And actually, I agree with Councillor Dixon as well. It's pecuniary interest it is the real worry. I think we mustn't get too hidebound on starting to look like a certain town council or parish council in Cheshire, where we have to read all the details and understand them. So yes, any other comments on this?
Could I just, are you supportive members of including a flow chart in with the agendas? Do you have a preference? I mean, I think I think both of them are on one page. Ideally, we want to keep it as simple as possible. I'm happy to look at the wording around predetermination bias, leave something in there, but without perhaps being quite so strongly worded, and cross-referencing it to other guidance that we have on that, because I think members have said that it is something that should be referred to. And otherwise,
I think if we weren't biased, we wouldn't be here. You know, if we go back to the licensing training. I think it was a licensing training by the QC. I mean, he made it clear that we are people of the world, and we are people who have bias. That is kind of why we stand, and you could say that that is actually why we're here, is because our bias we think is correct. So I'm not sure if bias is the correct word. But,
no, it is. I mean,
yes.
legally, it's the term that's used but alongside predetermination. So I think we do need to reference it, and it's included within the protocol as well. I agree, and I'm following on from Councillor Perry-Warren's point around training. I think this. Well, actually, it was the result of a motion that went to council, I think in November, to have training for all members on standards and code of conduct and the Nolan principles, which absolutely haven't lost sight of that. I think it would be useful to see if the new code comes in. The chief executive has indicated that he would like, if we are going to adopt the new code for May annual meeting, and on the back of that, we will all, that there will be additional training around declarations of interest. The new code focuses much more strongly on registers of interest and declarations of interest. And I think that we will certainly need additional training for members on both of those aspects. And we will look to be getting that in place within the next 2 to 3 months. And I'll bring something back to the next meeting of this committee for you to look at. For a training program for what we can cover, and so I can have your input on that to make sure it's covering everything that you want to see there.
Right, thank you. Councillor Shires.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Emma, in answer to your question that you've asked a few times and you haven't been given an answer to about the flow charts, I have preference for the second flow chart. Being somebody who, if I did have an interest to declare, I would become incredibly nervous about the protocol and how to do it and when to say it and what the correct format is, as we all were when we were brand new councillors and we had to speak at our first meeting. So I think it's incredibly useful. It breaks it up very, very easily, and it would help. Step one, the interest is pecuniary, disclosure interest and withdraw from the meeting. That's as straightforward as it gets, and it tells you what to do. And I would have preference for the second one, if that's helpful, Emma.
Do you think we should have a vote regarding the style of flow chart we prefer? Would that help you, Emma?
I think just a broad indication. If members are supportive of the second one for Councillor Shire's preference, then I'm happy to go with whatever members are broadly supportive of. Yes, we need a formal vote on the changes to the subsequent changes to the Constitution. So yeah.
And we need that vote on the subsequent changes to the Constitution now.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
So first, if I may ask members to raise their hands. Those in favour of the second flow chart as preferred by Councillor Shires. And those in favour of the second flow chart as not, Councillor John Rest. Okay, thank you. And then let us vote on the changes to the Constitution.
Can I just ask for a proposer and a seconder, Harry, please?
Can I have a proposer, Councillor Shires, and a seconder, Councillor Brown? All those in favour?
I'll just do a roll call for these, Harry.
All right, thank you.
Is a formal vote. So I'll just say your names in order. So Councillor Blathwaite.
Favour.
Councillor Rest.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Dixon.
For.
Councillor Perry-Warnes.
For.
And Councillor Shires.
For.
Okay, that's all in favour.
Thank you. Right, move on. Any other business? That's no other business. Do we need?
Cara, did you have any updates to provide on the any complaints at all?
Oh, sorry. Yes, sorry, Cara.
I don't have anything of particular interest in the last 3 to 6 months, there's been under 10 new Code of Conduct complaints, and none have been referred for investigation.
Thank you. And exclusion of the press and public, I don't think happily we need to trouble ourselves with that today. The date for the next meeting, Matt or Emma, do we have a date?
It's in April. I can just look that up quickly if you like. Just bear with me while it loads. 20th of April.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. So the next meeting is on the 20th of April at 2 p.m. Right. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate your help today. And I feel that I'll start slotting in a little bit better. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.